Hello, and welcome to the second season of Through the Veil. I am so looking forward to this season. Recording the first season was so wonderful. Actually, like my favorite thing I've been doing in the last few months. So I took a little break, enjoyed the summer with family, and now we're back with a second season. And first guest, so fitting for this second season, is going to be Clara from Sovereign Birth. Clara's birth was one of the first birth stories that I got to hear. That was a free birth of someone who I had actually met, who lived close to me. And it was just one of those things, one of those moments that I remember where I realized this could totally be possible for me. It's the power of story, the power of hearing people like us tell our stories. And I'm sitting here recording this intro with my little baby in my arms, as I often am, and I think you can hear my cat outside the door. And she's just going to be featured on this recording because I have recorded this intro 3 times, 3, 4, 5 times maybe. And she just keeps meowing outside the door. So there she is, our kitty Pickles on the podcast, little baby in my arms, just as life is. We just keep carrying on. With that said, enjoy Clara's story. She's going to share all 4 of her birth stories. I'm going to split it into 2 episodes. Enjoy Clara's story.
So I guess my mothering journey, it kind of just began, honestly, like as a young girl, because I was always interested in like the body and anatomy and physiology. I had more of a gaze towards the movement and kind of athletic side of it all to begin with. But then in adolescence, it moved into kind of reproductive health and women's bodies. As a teenager, I remember asking my mom if I could contact like local midwives and asked if I can shadow them. So I did that a little bit. I think I was about 14 when that kind of started. And I would just shadow prenatal visits, just being a little, kind of fly on the wall. And then that kind of morphed into my studies as I went into university, and I had the intention, I was pre-med for a while there and had the intention of becoming an OBGYN. But I went to an all-women's liberal arts college in Massachusetts because I'm from the States originally. And I started becoming really interested in anthropology. And that led me to kind of study the history of obstetrics and gynecology, which then made me realize that I did not align.
Yeah, I really want to be part of that.
Yeah, totally. It was, and to an extent still is, quite archaic. And that's when I found a deeper like interest in midwifery and understanding that more fully, more from, like a traditional midwifery perspective at that time. And I got really, really, really interested in just studying different cultures and how they approach birth. And I remember taking one course, it was titled Medical Management of the Female Body. And for me, it was so fascinating. It really kind of set me on this trajectory of kind of landing my passion for the work, for birth work, in more of like a social justice kind of framework. We'll have, many doulas get into this work because they love babies, right? And they love, birth as, as a process, and being in these spaces where there's so much oxytocin flowing and love and connection. But I really do it for the women and for their experience of birth, and the passion to, move, almost kind of back into a space where we're really centering the experience as being much more than just having a baby, right? But the experience on a more kind of holistic, right? How is it impacting our heart and our spirit, our bodies, where's our community, all of that, because it's so important, as you know. At several points in my younger years, I applied to midwifery school and was accepted on 2 occasions, and at both times I found reasons why I didn't want to go. Interestingly enough, we spent all this time
Yeah.
doing the application and doing the interview process, and then I would get the letter and I would go, I don't know actually if that's really what I want to do right
Same.
now. Yeah. So at one point, I decided, okay, I'm going to get a master's in public health first, then I'll go to midwifery school. And then after I did that, I was like, no, I'm going to go to India for a month first, then I'll revisit midwifery school. And then I just never revisited it. But that's just a little bit like these kind of stepping stones of just like my early childhood, that interest, how it kind of, moved into what I studied in my early 20s and late teens. And then where, it kind of dropped me, into my early doulaing years. I became a doula, I think the first birth I attended as a doula, I hadn't done any formal training at the time, but I was 18. So this is when I was in university, early university, and I attended my first birth. I did a midwifery internship in Guatemala for a summer. And that was really eye-opening on many levels, not just the birth realm and realizing what is actually necessary for birth, which really is not that much. The midwife I was working with, we just pulled up in front of this family's home. It was in the evening, and I got out of the car. I got, her things and the suitcases and the trunks and whatever. And then she said, okay, you go and call me back when she's pushing. And I never attended a birth before. And I was like, oh, okay, this is how we're doing it. Sure. And I just, witnessed this mother, this young family. It was her first labor, her first baby, and just really showing up, just human being to human being, and holding space for her. And I luckily called at the right time. And the midwife came when she started pushing in the pool, and the baby was there probably within 20 minutes or so. It was amazing. And it really, I reflect back on that experience time and time again, because it really did lay the foundation for how I view birth, and how I then in, 9 years time or however long it was, decided to birth my own baby. But when I did my formal training, I did it through Kappa initially, and that was in, when was that? Maybe 2013, after I got my master's. And I just, went in full on into doula work. I was on call for a year and a half straight. When you're young and you don't have children, right, you can do that and it's okay. And I was primarily attending births in hospitals. I was in Alberta at the time, and Alberta, the demand for midwives is very high, but the funding that the government allocates for their services is very low. It doesn't match the demand. So a lot of people who are wanting to have midwives there, they don't get them. And I would find that they would then hire doulas with an expectation that, okay, it's going to be in the hospital, but I have my doula, so it's going to be okay. Right?
She'll save me.
Exactly. Right. And it didn't take very many births until I realized, like, oh no, right, this is not going to work in that way. Most likely some things are going to happen that aren't going to be so great. And a year and a half doing that work really, really took a big toll on my heart. Definitely was traumatized myself by some of the things that I saw. And when I myself got pregnant, I knew that that was not what I wanted for my journey. But at the same time, funny enough, thought that free birth was irresponsible and risky, and I wasn't going to probably do that either. I remember, finding out that I was pregnant. I was 26, And luckily, it was just a short period of time until I got a midwife. But in that short period of time of not knowing if I would get one in Alberta, because the wait lists were so long if you didn't get on them quickly enough, I sat with myself in the living room couch and I thought, okay, am I going to birth in a hospital if I don't get a midwife? Or am I going to free birth? What am I going to do? And I wasn't super certain. Again, I had this like narrative that free birth, what if there's shoulder dystocia? What if there's, what if the cord's wrapped around the neck? Right? All the things that people, will say to us when we share that we have free birth our own babies, or, we attend free births ourselves. I still had that, kind of cultural programming, right? Of birth is risky if you don't have a licensed care provider there. But I didn't have to think too hard, because I was fortunate enough that a midwife friend of mine took me on as her patient. So yeah, I didn't have to go too deep into the inner inquiry of what felt best for me at that time. And I really don't know, to be honest, what I would have chosen if I hadn't have gotten a midwife. But I'm so fortunate for that birth that I did. So that was 8 years ago. Sam is almost 8. So that was 8 years ago. That's where my head was at. But his pregnancy, the pregnancy was it was very smooth. I was teaching a lot of yoga at the time. And I taught yoga, including hot yoga, until I taught hot yoga until I was 37 weeks pregnant. And I taught my last yin restorative class the night before I went into labor with him. So just a few hours before I went into labor. So that's just to say I was feeling very good and very strong in my body and very capable. And I don't remember really having any fears. I was quite confident that we would have a home birth and it would go well and I would have a baby and I would be healthy and he would be healthy at the end. Which I'm really grateful for, because I know how challenging, especially that first, one can be with all the uncertainties. But I really moved through it with a sense of confidence and a sense that it's a very natural process, and all will be well. I consented to basically all of the community standards. So I got blood work done. I did the 10 and 20 week ultrasound. I didn't do the glucose screening, but I did the GBS swab. I'm also Rh negative, so I took Winrow as well a couple times. But again, for who I was at the time, that felt good. Were conversations really, informed consent discussions? No, not really. Very little information was given, but I also didn't have the questions, to ask. And so I really, placed a lot of trust in my care provider and just went with what felt good with, for me at the time. I had a pretty textbook labor. My waters broke. This was June 10th, 2016. They broke almost close to midnight. I was really ready. I said to my husband, I'm ready to get this baby out. He arrived on his due date, so very punctual.
Does he remain punctual?
Mm-hmm. His baby was very punctual. And yeah, he is still a very punctual guy. He likes to be on time to things. But the waters broke. Yeah, it was a pop and a big gush in the bed. And I just remember being really excited and really curious just about what is labor going to feel like? What's a contraction going to feel like? Having attended, quite a few births up until that point. I was really curious about how it would feel being on the other side. I had hired, or not really hired, I invited, she just came as a friend, a doula that I was working with in a practice, we practiced together. So she came and my mom was there and my husband was there, and then our midwife as well. The contractions came, I think there was about 15 minutes or so from the time the waters broke until the contractions started. And then they just really progressed super rhythmically. Again, like we were timing things. I did that at that time as well. And things, they were just rolling. They were rolling. I think I was in labor for about 5 hours just with my mom and my husband there. And then, things got, more intense, and I called for my doula to come, and then also called the midwife. So that was about, let's say, about 5:30 a.m. on June 11th.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, just moving through our apartment. We were in a little tiny apartment in Edmonton. It was the summer. It was super hot. And just, being, leaning against the wall, my husband like squeezing my hips, being surprised early on how that was super, super helpful. I now realize like why women wanted me to do that so often during their labors. And very vocal. I found, that just softening my jaw, letting, some sounds come out was really soothing. Once the midwife arrived and my doula arrived quite quickly after I called, and I got into the pool, and that felt really, really great. I was really in that kind of space of experiencing contraction and then kind of drifting off into sleep. So that kind of nice, nice rhythm there of being kind of present, not really, and then, dwindling into a nice little rest for a few minutes. Leaning against the pool, just forearms on the pool, on my knees, and really using my breath. So I remember thinking, reminding myself, okay, listen to your breath. And I used just, the sound of my breath as that focal point. And not have, like, that was really my main tool for that labor, was the breath, of listening to it, elongating it, and just, really centering in on that, allowing that to anchor me. My doula's hand, I remember squeezing her hand and thinking, wow, like this simple thing, how impactful that is. Right? Again, reflecting like, okay, I get it now. I get the presence of having, that kind of wise female support person there, and just having her hand and repeatedly squeezing it. Like I said, my mom was also there, so I would reach over and grab onto her hand as well. That felt super, super special. I'm her only daughter, only child. And so her being there to support me in that, journey, moving through this threshold of welcoming my first baby, her first grandchild, it was really, really special. I had really bad hemorrhoids, and my husband, bless his heart, for I think almost the entire time I was in the pool. So I was about 8 hours. I was in the pool. He was in there with me. He really wanted to catch the baby. And we have photos, right, with like a timestamp on them of him kind of almost in like a quarterback football position, like as if the baby was going to just fly out at any moment. And, the timestamp is like a good 6 hours before, the baby actually arrived. Okay. So he was super committed. But the only relief that I could get, the hemorrhoids were so painful. And I didn't know I had them until I was actually in labor. I didn't realize prenatally. And he, with a warm compress in the pool, just held them for me the entire time. And I'm so grateful for that, because again, it was so intense, the feeling of having them there. And he was very, very committed. And he will share that he did not eat. He didn't go to the bathroom. He only had sips of water throughout the whole time. Yes. So he's very proud of his participation in that experience. I remember also, at a few points, things getting more intense, and, calling to my midwife, who is a friend of mine, still is, and, calling her name and, asking for help, and, all these things, right, that we do during those intense moments. And, just like a fleeting thought, I remember thinking to myself, okay, this is the time people ask for epidurals. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I'm at home. There's no epidural here. We're not going anywhere. And that was it. Right? Yeah. So just a fleeting thought, like just a few seconds. You're coming in and out. Also, this thought coming to mind of, just that intensity along the outer edges of the pelvis. And I'm a really visual person, and I just had this like image of those trash compactors, and like I'm like, oh, that is what is happening to my pelvis right now. It's just being pressurized on either side. But again, right, we drift in and we drift out, and so it's just these fleeting thoughts. But I found, in hindsight, looking back on it, just so interesting the things that come to mind. And those were two things. I pushed for about 2 hours. Did not and still do not really enjoy that sensation of pushing. I would much rather prefer laboring and baby just arriving just through that. Yes. Yeah, the pushing was that feeling of, just, the uterus pushing on its own. Still to this day, 4 babies later, if someone would ask me, like, how do you push? I'd be like, I don't know, because I just let my body do it. Yeah. And that's, it's not, I don't know what it is. It's, for me, it was like, I was just, you kind of take a step back, and I was just kind of witnessing the body do this work, which is powerful, right? On so many levels. So it was about, 2 hours. And I should go back a step actually before that. Two significant things happened. The midwife had asked me at one point if I had gone pee. And I was like, I don't know. Right? Like, I've been in the water for so long. I don't know. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. And, she said, well, if you don't think you've gone pee, like, try to go pee. If you can't go pee, then I'll have to put a catheter in. And again, another one of those thoughts, right, that just comes and it goes. And what came in that moment was like, are you threatening me with a catheter? Right?
Yeah, just actually,
again, 3-second thought of like, I'm in active labor. Pushing started soon after that. But again, just one of those, drifting thoughts of like, wait a second, did that just happen? Did you just say it in that way? I did get out of the pool and I went into the bathroom, and I didn't make it. I couldn't sit down on the toilet, but I did go pee just on the bathroom floor. And I remember my husband just being like, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Just go to the bathroom. It's fine. I'm like, I know. And then after that, and this is, as a birth worker, this was really significant as well. And it really, it helps me just to conceptualize like where we are in labor. What are our capacities in labor, especially in the kind of sphere of advocacy. And what happened shortly after that, before I got back in the pool, was that she offered to check my cervix. And this was something I had said prenatally. I was like, don't even ask me. Don't even ask. And I told my doula, I told my husband, they all knew. I was like, no one even ask. I don't want my cervix checked. Don't even ask me. If I want it checked, I'll let you know, right? Type of thing. And she asked. And you're in this, right, deep space of labor, just like I was when she asked about, have you gone pee in the catheter? And I couldn't vocalize, hey, I had asked you not to ask me that. But in my head, I'm like, I asked you not to ask me that. Why are you asking me that, right? And also in that state, right, of labor, she asked, and I was like, okay, just okay.
Yeah.
And I remember my doula looking at me and my husband looking at me, and they're like, really? Like, you didn't want to have that done. And I was like, no, it's okay. And I kind of said in a whisper, and in my head, I was like, I just thought, like, clear thoughts are going in my head, but I couldn't vocalize them, right? And I remember thinking to myself, it's easier. It's easier to say okay right now, right? I don't have the capacity to say no. Just that word alone felt so much harder to get out energetically, right? Than yes, okay, right? And so I did consent to it, and I got to the bed and laid down, and she couldn't even do the exam. It was too painful. I think she could just maybe touch externally. And I was like, no, I need to get up. This is too much. And I mean, rightfully so, because then when I got back into the birth pool, like I was pushing like very soon after that. But also knowing too in my brain that, you know, she was asking because she wanted to know when to call the secondary, didn't want to call too soon, right? So my doula brain, like I knew this stuff, but again, at the same time, that doesn't justify, you know, doing that, knowing that I had asked previously not to, you know, not to ask.
It's my also husband, a testament to how advocacy works when you're in labor, right? That you can feel like in this moment, I'm a pretty strong person. I'll say no when I need to say no, but it's not the same. Like birth is an altered state. So as strong of a woman as you are and as good as you are at speaking your mind and saying what you want, it's not really the time for self-advocacy. They don't go together.
Oh, absolutely. Right. And so that's why I say, like in my work now, like you don't expect, you know, having these skills to advocate for yourself to get you the birth that you want in a setting that isn't conducive to the type of birth that you want. Right. And that really then siphons back to, you know, my earlier days as a doula leading up to Sam's birth and how, you know, my presence wasn't enough to shift things. It's not going to shift the culture in that hospital when you've had people there who have been doing what they're doing, like they're doing it for 30 plus years, right? We're just simply really, kind of bystanders to what's going to roll out, you know? Definitely, right? Absolutely what you said, that altered state, we cannot put it upon ourselves, right, in that state to advocate as a way to get the birth that we want if we're not in a setting or with people, right, that are supportive of the vision that we have, right? Nor do I think that responsibility can be put on partners either. You know, different conversation perhaps there, but you know, that's too much because you're talking about, you know, systems that are in place, right? And they work in a certain way. And that advocacy bit doesn't always do the trick fully. So definitely feeling that, in my body, but you know, in that moment. And again, just such an interesting kind of space to be in where at once I was having this narrative in my mind, very clear of like what was going on and what I really wanted to say. But then physically, I just couldn't get it out. Right. And that's not a blame for anyone, right? It's just this realization of, like you said, that altered state that labor brings us into, that we want labor to bring us into so that we can birth our babies, right, physiologically. It's all part of the design. So then I remember getting back into the pool after that check that was not successful. And my doula and my husband, they said to me later on when I brought that up, you know, I don't know if it was days, weeks, or months after. And they said, you know, your labor slowed down after that. Did you realize that? And I didn't at the time. But it makes sense when you know about the physiology and the hormonal matrix and, you know, of birth that would happen. That's one of the reasons why I didn't really want her to ask. But I remember the secondary midwife arriving and thinking to myself, okay, like things are very close, right? Because the secondary is there. I should add too that I also, you know, I consented to Doppler checks during this labor. And when she arrived, I knew her and I was happy to see her. And I remember also there was this pause where I kind of came a bit more into like just myself, who I am when I'm not in labor, and was like a little bit chatty with her. Had mentioned like the births that we had been at together before, and just kind of had a little bit of a check-in as I was in the pool. And it was probably just for a few minutes, and then going back into the depths of labor and feeling that sensation to push. And the sensation to push for me, it would come for like a little bit during a contraction, and then it would ease off and I would still have the contraction and the contraction would stop. Then I would have another contraction and it would hang out, that feeling to push a little bit longer until I was feeling that sensation of push through the duration of each of the contractions. that wasn't something that I didn't really think about the progression of pushing prenatally. I didn't, kind of think about, how is it going to feel? How's the rhythm going to be? So that was an interesting thing just to witness in the moment of, it's coming and it's there for a bit, but then it goes away until it was fully present through each contraction. So again, my husband finally caught the baby after his hours of being in that kind of hike position. And I just remember, just seeing Sam. We had already named him. So in the last kind of maybe 2 pushes or so, I remember kind of calling his name, being like, come on, Sam, like, come on. And baby he was right on my chest. I remember the midwife asking me to turn him a different way. It was just momentarily, wasn't super, intrusive or anything, but I remember that. And, we have pictures, right? So of a gloved hand feeling the cord and all those things now, right? I'm more aware, and there's some narrative, right, and discourse behind that imagery. But again, at the time, that's where I was, and I was okay with that. And I remember, right? You're just so happy and so relieved, and he was so alert and so beautiful and super chubby. And my mom was there, my doula friend. I remember looking at my doula. She was kind of on the other side of the pool, and she kind of had some tears in her eyes. And then I wasn't in the pool very long until I got out and we went to the bedroom. I mean, maybe it was 20 minutes. Like, it felt quite short looking back on it. And he just started nursing right away. I remember my friend coming over, and she was like ready to help me with nursing, but he was already nursing. She's like, oh, okay, this is already happening. Great. And then the midwife said, like, are you feeling crampy? Right? All these types of questions around the readiness of the placenta to be birthed. And I don't really recall feeling crampy. She did say, okay, like, it's almost 30 minutes. We would like to give you Pitocin. And I said, okay. And I really don't remember much else regarding the placenta. I don't really even remember, like looking at it very much. I did have it encapsulated. A friend of mine did that for me. I did do placenta prints actually on my own, now that I'm reflecting back. But I didn't have much of a reverence for the placenta. I didn't know much about it. It wasn't, something that really came to mind prenatally. We did delayed cord clamping. I don't remember how long that was, though. My husband, I'm sure he cut the cord, but as you can tell from how I'm speaking about it, I don't really remember very much. And this part felt quite rushed to me. And in the moment, like, I felt quite rushed. My midwife checked for tearing, and I did tear, and she wasn't sure if it was a 2nd degree or a 3rd degree. And she felt better if we went to the hospital and an obstetrician did the stitches. I didn't know at the time that there was an alternative to stitches. I didn't know I could just work to heal it on my own. So I said, okay. No alternatives were given to me either. And again, though, it's, meeting myself where I was at the time, and it felt fine for me. But I felt rushed. I remember the midwife asking, okay, where are your clothes? Where are your hair ties? Just things like this to, like, help me get ready to go. And I remember just kind of, like, not being able to give instructions and directions to where things were, and wanting myself to get those things, but I wasn't able to get them at the time. I think I was maybe 30 minutes out, right, really, from giving birth. And so, I wasn't in the capacity to, like, get up and go to the dresser and look for things. I'm sure if there's a little bit more time given, I would have been able to do that. I remember them bringing me the things I didn't want to wear. Like, yeah, I remember like exactly what they brought me to wear and being like, no, I don't really want to wear this. But again, I just put it on. We lived on the second story of an apartment building, and there was no elevator or anything. You had to go down steps. Yeah. And so I remember going down the steps, holding on to my husband and to my doula, and getting downstairs. And I just had to sit down like on one of the steps because I was too weak. Feeling a little bit lightheaded. Just like not in the capacity to be expected to walk downstairs and go outside and get in a car and drive, right? It took a little bit of time because I don't think we had the car seat installed. So my husband had to like go to the car and install the car seat, so like this whole thing. My mom stayed behind, and I don't even know to this day how she did it, but she like emptied the pool on her own. She put the pool away. She cleaned the house. She made a beautiful like birthday cake. Like it was so sweet. We got back and everything was beautiful. And but yeah, that car ride going there, I think it probably was, I don't know, a 20-minute car ride or so. And then getting in a wheelchair. I hadn't eaten anything. And so my doula got just from like we went to the vending machine just to see what was there. And there was like some granola bars. So I got a granola bar. And then going up and having to wait in the room, right, for the OB to come in. My husband holding the baby. And I remember like the OB coming in and assessing and then starting to stitch. And I just remember as I was lying there being like, God, this is a lot of stitches. It just felt like a lot. And I didn't I wanted my baby on me, but I also wanted just to kind of focus in on getting the stitches and kind of being done with that. So again, my husband was holding baby, but as mothers, right, we kind of have like our eye also, right, it's always, the gaze is always over towards our little ones. I had told my midwife earlier that I didn't want to get any antibiotics because that was offered to me. And she was like, okay, sure, yep. And then when the OB came in, the OB asked, and I felt like the midwife didn't convey what I had asked for. It felt like, to me, like she was just trying to be kind of friendly and like buddy almost with the OB that was coming in. And so I had to then, say, no, I don't want those. And then the OB asked why, so it's like that whole conversation. And it was just like, I didn't want to have that. I was tired, just had a baby. Felt like, she was asking me to explain myself, and I just felt like that shouldn't have been asked. So I didn't get the antibiotics. And then we went home, and like I said, my mom had everything beautifully done, and Sam was born in the afternoon. And by the time we got home, it was like 5 hours later. Like it took forever. And so it was dark now. So she had candles everywhere. And we had the birthday cake and I think some soup or something. And then we got cozy and it was bedtime. But the stitches were so painful. It was definitely, I think she definitely overdid it. And it was definitely the hardest part of the postpartum by far. Like I couldn't sit upright for the longest time because it would just be throbbing. I remember a friend of mine brought over like one of those donuts for me that I could sit on, which was very helpful. But again, gravity, so it still, right, was really uncomfortable. I remember like my in-laws coming over at one point, and I think this was even like week 2 they came over. And I remember I was like still very uncomfortable, and I had, told my husband like they have to leave now because I have to lie down. Like I can't sit like this anymore. And that was like 2 weeks later. So it was very hard. And that's one of the things I remember the most about like that early postpartum after Sam's birth is that recovery. But you know, we're moms and we get through it. And you know, at that time, the decisions aligned with who I was and what I knew. You know, it's all part of like, we don't know until we realize we don't know, right? Which is a hard space to be in. But his birth, you know, it was what I thought I would have. It was what I wanted. I wouldn't have changed anything really, you know, in the moment and, you know, coming out of it, it felt very good. For our story together. And it also, after his birth, you know, I told my husband, I was like, all right, I'm birthed out. Like I'm birthed out. I really, and what I meant by that was I wanted nothing to do with birth after I birthed him. I took like maybe 3 years, off of attending births as a doula. I taught a lot of prenatal yoga before I had Sam, and I did not want to go back to teaching prenatal yoga. I didn't want to be around pregnant people. I didn't want to talk about birth. I was like done, and that doneness was really rooted in how unnecessary the experiences were of the women that I had supported in the hospital setting as a doula previous to having Sam, and seeing just how through his birth, when you just let things be, how simple it can be. And of course, things can happen. I'm not naive to that. But very rarely do they when we just step back. And so I was really angry. Like that was what the burst out kind of experience was for me. It was just like, I'm calling BS on what's going on. Like, you know, in the system. That's not okay. It's unnecessary. It's harmful. Look what I just did. Look at the birth I just had. There was ease in that. Why can't more people be supported in that? Right? That's really what it came down to. So it took me out of the birth world for a bit, but then it also simultaneously lit this fire under me because now I had this experience in my own body to kind of weigh like what is really going on, you know, what is really going on, and realizing again that, you know, the many women I had supported in birth, that their births did not have to go the way that they went, right? That was not birth. That was not birth design, right? So yeah, I had to take some time off after that just to reorganize my thoughts and kind of come back into a space of, of centeredness, so to speak, and groundedness to be able to offer care to people, and not hold that kind of anger really, which is in frustration really is what it was. Why are we making things more difficult and challenging than they need to be was a big realization from his birth. Yeah. So that was Sam. I think I'll leave his there. So following Sam's birth, it took, about 2 years until I was starting to think about having another child. And fortunately for us, when we decided that it was time, it happened quite quickly. And with this birth and pregnancy, we were now in BC. We were in like the Vancouver area now. So different regarding access to midwives. This was 5 years ago now. So I didn't have that kind of thought in my head of what will I do if I don't get a midwife. I got one, very easily. And Ryan's birth, it made me realize, for my midwife experience in Alberta with the midwife that I had, how non-medical, even though I consented to all the community standards, how non-medical it felt because it wasn't pushed. She wasn't wanting to do a lot of like investigating into things. Those decisions really were like, okay, this is community standard. Do you have, are you leaning in one way or another? And again, not true informed consent discussions, because not always were alternatives actually given. But I would say yes, like I'll do that. I'm fine with that. With Ryan's, it made me realize the difference in practices and in cultures around midwifery and around care, which was quite eye-opening for me. So I got our midwife, and early on in the pregnancy, I was feeling really, really weak. Like I would go out, Sam's 2 at this time, right? So I would go out with him, say to go to the park or whatnot, and about every block or even half a block, I'd have to sit down and take a few breaths. I was exhausted, really fatigued. I wasn't really able to cook for myself. I remember like ordering food from Beautiful all the time, which is, if you're not in Vancouver, it's like a vegan kind of restaurant. And there's another similar restaurant in our neighborhood. So I remembered like ordering food from them all the time for lunch because I just couldn't even prepare healthy food for myself. And I told the midwife this, and she said, okay. And she said, well, we can do some blood work. And she said, also, you're in your first trimester, and this might just be first trimester stuff. And I remember thinking to myself, no, like I've been pregnant before. Like this isn't normal. I shouldn't be feeling this depleted. It didn't feel right for me intuitively. I felt like something was off. But the blood work came back. Everything was fine. And so they kind of just, let it go as just, okay, she's tired because she's a mom of a 2-year-old and she's pregnant in her first trimester. Again, though, it felt extreme to me, the fatigue. At 20 weeks, I consented to an ultrasound only because we wanted to know the sex of the baby. I didn't know at the time that you could just do blood work for that. So we did the ultrasound, and I was back to teaching yoga, and I was teaching an evening class, and the class was over. It was about 8:45 in the evening, and I saw that my midwife had called about 15 minutes prior. And I thought to myself, well, that's weird. Why would she call me at 8:30 at night? So I was like, okay, so maybe something must be up. And she asked, like, call me when you get this. So I called her that evening, and she said to me that, okay, like you're having a boy, another boy, congratulations. I had asked her to tell me what the sex was. And she said, also, we have found that there's a cyst on your baby's head. And I said, okay, and what does that mean? And so she went on to talk about trisomy 18 and some other things, like really like, high risk, quite scary things for a mother to hear. Things. Yeah. And I remember as she was talking, having this, train of thought in my mind of, okay, there's one cyst and there's nothing else. And I knew as a doula that if there's only that one marker, you're actually not supposed to tell the mother or the patient that information, because more likely than not, it's nothing. It's an error either on the ultrasound itself, or it is there in fact, but it's just going to go away over time, and it's not going to cause any harm to baby. And actually the harm in the stress that will be produced in the mom is most likely more harmful than that cyst would actually, be. And so I had this train of thought of, you're not supposed to be telling me this. Why are you telling me this, as she's speaking to me on the phone? And then she went into also share that she had a mother whose baby also had this one marker, and that baby at 7 days after birth died.
Oh my gosh.
And yes. And again, in my doula head, I'm like, okay, she's been traumatized by this prior experience. She's putting this out to me because she hasn't healed. And this is her story. This is not mine to carry. However, I'm also 20 weeks pregnant. And right, like nearly impossible, perhaps not to freak out, even knowing what really is most likely going on for this midwife and how inappropriate it was for her to share that story with me. So she recommended then that we go to BC Women's, we get this higher tech ultrasound done, we get genetic testing done, because I didn't do that with Sam, and I wasn't planning on doing that with Ryan either. So we hadn't done that with him at the time. And then doing this other batch of testing, which wasn't covered by MSP, so that we would have to, it was like $800, which we didn't have to, to do for this. So we couldn't do that. But I said, we'll do the other things. I got off the phone with her and just like bawling. My husband's like, what's going on? Like, I couldn't even explain to him because I was just hysterical. Remember calling my mom afterwards and like explaining to her, like, this is what she said, right? Just, giving the information. We couldn't get an appointment for 4 days. And in those 4 days, I just remember like feeling totally numb. Like my husband had to take off work. Like I just couldn't even function. It was awful. It was awful. So we got our appointment and we went to BC Women's, and I told my husband before, and I was like, the tech cannot tell you if anything is, wrong. I was like, so don't ask, like she can't tell you. Of course we get in there and he asks her, like, do you see anything? And I kind of gave him a look, like, don't put her on the spot like that, She was older. She had been doing this, she told us, for a long time. And she looked at us and she said, I don't see anything to be concerned about, but the geneticist will come in and he'll talk to you. And I was like, oh, okay. So he came in and very nonchalantly looked at things super quickly, and we've been marinating on this whole thing, right, for days, right? And so he just comes over, he looks at the screen and he's like, your baby's fine. There's nothing to be concerned about. And so at once, right, we're relieved and we're happy. But then also I'm a little bit pissed, because we just went through all of this stuff, right? And these terrible stories and that, again, that knowing that she shouldn't even have told me this, none of this should have really even happened, we should have just been told the sex of the baby and that was it. I don't remember being in the headspace to say anything to the midwife of how inappropriate this whole, that experience was. Again, too much emotional labor, right? To carry that, to do that, unfortunately. Then at 33 weeks, I got some blood work done and my platelets were dropping, and they hit below 150. So when they hit, usually, right, norm is between 150 and about 400. That's the range there for platelets. And so mine had gotten, I think at that point, just below 150, let's say like 148 or something. And so the midwife called me and she let me know, and she said, we're just going to keep an eye on this, but just so you know, like they're below this number, which is seen as being abnormal. But no other information was given. I didn't have the questions to ask to be like, well, what does it mean if it goes even further down? It just didn't come to mind. And I remember shortly after that, considering what had happened at 20 weeks and now like my platelets are dropping and I'm still feeling like quite fatigued. Not to the same extent as the first trimester and having to stop every half a block or so, but still quite fatigued. And I remember we had to walk up a hill. We lived in Horseshoe Bay at the time, and from the water to our house, there was a slight hill. And I remember walking up the hill this day and pushing Sam in the stroller. And I thought to myself, gosh, wouldn't that be ironic if I just have the most medicalized birth experience ever? Like, it was just, again, this came through. Like, wouldn't that be crazy? Me, right? Yeah. And that was kind of it. Like, I didn't really think about it more. It just, this thought just came in and out. So I continued to consent to the kind of the routine blood work. And every time that I would get the blood work done, the platelets would be lower and lower. And so I want to say maybe about 35, 36 weeks, I started getting blood work drawn every week or twice a week. So it was more frequent just to keep an eye on things. But again, nothing was really given to me, and I wasn't in the mindset, for what reason, I don't know, to really research much. And I'm such a researcher, like that is my background. And so it's odd thinking back that I didn't tap into that. And information from care providers on, okay, how do we increase platelets? It wasn't very robust. It focused a little tiny bit on food. I mean, like the tiniest bit on food. And I was doing all those things anyway, so it wasn't new. And then at 37 weeks and 3 days, we went to a friend's birthday party, her child's birthday party, and we were on our way home from the party, and I got a call from the midwife. And she said to me, Clara, your platelets are below 90. And we had to consult with an OB because when they get to that point, we're required to do that. And the OB wants to induce you and get baby out. And I just start crying. And I was crying because I had been to so many inductions and never did one of them end positively.
All right, friends, we are going to leave Clara's episode there for now and finish off with part 1. You can pick up in the next episode for the completion of this birth story and Clara's next 2 birth stories. As always, thank you so much for listening. You can check out birth.throughtheveil for birth pictures and other information on this podcast on Instagram. Check out the show notes for ways to submit your story and ways to connect with Clara. New episodes come out every other Tuesday this season, taking a little bit more space around my family, giving space for all of us. So every other Tuesday, bi-weekly episodes this year. You can follow, subscribe, share, rate and review this podcast to be in support. And until next time, Ember and I will see you then.